For my 38th birthday, my mother-in-law threw me a party at the city's most expensive restaurant. Everyone was smiling, but no one was looking at me. They were looking through me. My husband held his phone up, not to take a picture with me, but of me, like a spectator waiting for the main event. She slid a beautifully wrapped box across the table, her smile a masterpiece of polite malice. "From all of us, dear," she said, her voice like ice. "Something to help you start your new life." She had no idea how right she was. My new life was about to begin, but it was nothing like the one she had wrapped in silk paper and cruelty. If they've ever acted like you weren't there until your absence echoed louder than presence, share your story. And if this feels like your table too, like and subscribe. My name is Clara Walsh, and for the first 3 years of my marriage, my world was measured in the rich, earthy aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. My kingdom was a small, high-end cafe called The Daily Grind, nestled in a leafy suburb just outside Seattle. It was a place of warm wood, soft jazz, and the comforting hiss of the espresso machine's steam wand, a sound that felt more like home than the silent, cavernous house my husband and I shared with his mother. I wasn't just a barista, I was a craftsman, a quiet conductor of morning rituals for 100 different lives. My hands knew the precise temperature to steam milk into a velvety microfoam, the exact pressure to tamp the grounds for a perfect shot of espresso, and the delicate flick of the wrist needed to pour a rosetta or a heart on the surface of a latte. This was my art, my pride, and the source of a quiet confidence that radiated through me in a way nothing else ever had. The cafe was my sanctuary, a stage where I felt seen and valued. I knew my regulars not just by their orders, but by the stories in their eyes. There was Mr. Sal, Mr. Abernathy, a retired history professor who would read by the window for hours, his presence a steady, comforting anchor to the day. There was Sarah, a young novelist who typed furiously on her laptop, her creativity seemingly fueled by the triple shot Americanos I'd place silently by her side. I knew when her characters were giving her trouble by the way she'd stare into the empty cup. I learned to read the subtle shifts in the human condition, to offer a kind word or simply a perfect cup of coffee as a small gesture of solidarity against the chaos of the outside world. This was more than a service job, it was a practice in empathy. My husband, Mark, used to see it that way. Too. We met right here, in this cafe. He came in one rainy Tuesday, looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I made him a lavender latte, something to soothe the tension I saw on his brow. We talked for an hour, and by the time he left, the storm both outside and inside him seemed to have passed. He was captivated by the way I commanded my space behind the counter, orchestrating a dozen different orders with a dancer's grace in the early days of our relationship. He'd bring his friends to the cafe, not just for the coffee, but to watch me work. His pride as bright and warm as the morning sun. He loved that I had a skill, a passion that was entirely my own, separate from him and his world. Your magic, Clara," he'd whisper to me at night. "You build these tiny, perfect moments for people, and it's a gift." A year later, he proposed in that very same spot, getting down on one knee right beside the pastry case, the scent of espresso and cinnamon in the air. He promised that he would always cherish the world I had built for myself. That golden light began to dim the day his mother, Eleanor, first set foot in my cafe. A few weeks after our wedding, she arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and silent judgment, her tailored suit a stark contrast to the relaxed atmosphere of the daily grind. She didn't look at the menu, she looked at me, her eyes scanning my uniform, my hands, my very existence with a cool, appraising gaze that made me feel like an item up for auction, one she had already deemed unworthy of a bid. She ordered a simple black coffee and watched every move I made, her expression unreadable but heavy. From that day forward, she never referred to my work as a career or even a job. In her carefully chosen words, it was my little hobby, a charming way to pass the time until I found something more substantive. In her world of charity galas, board meetings, and inherited wealth. My life of honest, skilled labor was a temporary embarrassment, a chapter she was patiently waiting for Mark to close. The shadow she cast was long and insidious, slowly creeping into the sunlit spaces of my marriage. Her primary weapon was the ghost of Mark's ex-girlfriend, Amelia. The name would drop into conversations with the weight of a perfectly polished stone, creating ripples of inadequacy that washed over me while we were having Sunday dinner in her sterile, white dining room. A room so pristine it felt like a museum exhibit. Eleanor would casually mention, "Oh, I spoke to Amelia's mother the other day. Amelia just made partner at her law firm in New York. Such an ambitious girl. We always knew she was destined for great things." She never looked at me when she said it, but the message was as clear as the crystal glasses on her table. Amelia was the standard, the blueprint of the daughter-in-law she had wanted, and I was the flawed deviation she was forced to endure. A framed photo of Mark and Amelia, smiling on a yacht in the Mediterranean, remained on the grand piano in her living room, a silent, perpetual testament to the life he could have had. Mark, who once celebrated my unique path, began to grow quiet during these moments. At first, he'd offer a token defense, a quiet, "That's great for her, Mom," before quickly changing the subject. But his defense grew weaker with each passing month, eventually fading into a resigned silence. He would simply fix his gaze on his plate, a silent accomplice to his mother's psychological warfare, leaving me to fend for myself in the chilling quiet. That was the beginning of her campaign, a slow and methodical erosion of my identity, waged not with angry shouts, but with the chilling kindness of 1,000 tiny cuts. The attacks were never direct, always disguised as acts of maternal concern. For my birthday one year, she gave me a stack of books, all elegantly wrapped in silver paper. They weren't novels or poetry, but titles like Dressing for the Executive Suite, The Modern Woman's Guide to Professional Networking, and From Service to Success, Finding Your Corporate Calling. I had to smile and thank her, my heart sinking as I understood the unspoken message. You are not enough. You need to be fixed. You need to be remade in an image I approve of. I would see the books on my nightstand, their glossy covers a constant reminder of my perceived failings in her eyes, a silent accusation in my own bedroom. Her critiques of my appearance were just as subtle and just as damaging. She once insisted on taking me shopping for my anniversary dinner with Mark, framing it as a generous treat. The experience was a masterclass in humiliation, in a boutique where price tags had more zeros than I was used to. She would hold up dresses and say, "This has the right structure, but perhaps the color is too bold for you. Dear, we want you to look elegant, not conspicuous." Every choice she made for me was a correction, every suggestion a thinly veiled criticism. I left with a dress that was beautiful but felt like a costume, one designed for the woman she wanted me to be, not the woman I was. Before the anniversary dinner, as I was getting ready, she came into my room and adjusted the dress, her fingers cool against my skin. "Much better," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Now you look like you belong with him." The implication was clear before I didn't. She wasn't just commenting on my clothes, she was stripping me of my own judgment, planting seeds of doubt that made me second guess every choice I made. She was rewriting the narrative of my life, turning my confidence into confusion and my contentment into a problem that needed solving. The most painful part was watching Mark change, the man who had proposed to me amidst the scent of coffee beans, who once loved my independence, slowly became a mouthpiece for his mother's ambitions. It began with small things. He'd stop suggesting we meet his work friends at my cafe. "It's just not the right environment. You know, a little too casual," he'd say, parroting a line I was sure Eleanor had fed him. The weak defenses he once mounted in my honor disappeared completely, replaced by a weary resignation. The breaking point in my heart came one evening. Before his company's annual dinner, I'd chosen a simple, elegant black dress, one I felt confident in. As I was about to leave, he stopped me. "You know, honey, maybe my mom has a point," he said, avoiding my eyes. It's an important night. Maybe you should wear the pearl earrings she bought you instead of those silver ones. They're more classic. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and foreign. It was her word, not his. He was no longer just failing to defend me. He was actively participating in the campaign to erase me. Each of his concessions felt like a betrayal, a small piece of our shared world being handed over to Eleanor, whose financial hold over him was an unspoken truth that governed our lives. She had paid the down payment on our house, a fact she never mentioned but was always present, like the expensive, uncomfortable furniture in her living room. The man I married was disappearing, replaced by a reflection of his mother's desires. The invisible crack that had formed between us on that first day in the cafe was widening into a chasm, and I felt myself standing on one side, watching him drift further and further away on the other. He no longer saw the artist in the apron. He saw the project his mother was determined to complete. And I was beginning to realize, with a chilling certainty, that the project's goal wasn't to improve me, but to erase the woman he had first fallen in love with entirely. The quiet campaign of psychological warfare continued, each week bringing a new, subtle calibration of torment. My life became a study in bracing for the next invisible blow. I learned to read the minute shifts in Eleanor's expression, the slight tightening of her lips that preceded a backhanded compliment, the flicker in her eyes that signaled a story about Amelia was about to be deployed. I existed in a state of high alert, a soldier in a war no one else could see, and the exhaustion was seeping into my bones, making them feel heavy and brittle. Mark, my husband, my supposed partner in this life, had completed his transformation from ally to neutral observer. And now, he was becoming an active agent of her will. The house, his childhood home that was now ours, never felt like my own. It was her territory, a sprawling, silent stage for my slow erasure. And I was merely a guest with a temporary visa, its expiration date looming. The breaking point, the moment the final. Fractured piece of hope crumbled to dust. Did not come with a bang. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, cloaked in the oppressive silence of an empty house. I had come home early from my shift, a migraine pounding behind my eyes like a trapped bird. The cafe had been unusually stressful, and the thought of a few hours of quiet in a dark room felt like a desperate need. The house was supposed to be empty. Mark was at work, and Eleanor was at one of her charity luncheons. I kicked off my shoes at the door, the cool marble floor a small shock to my tired feet, and padded silently toward the kitchen for a glass of water, craving the stillness. But the house was not empty. From the formal living room, a space we rarely used, a room preserved in amber like a museum exhibit, I heard Eleanor's voice. It was different from the carefully modulated, public-facing tone she used with me. This voice was relaxed, conspiratorial, and laced with a venom that was shockingly pure. I froze, hidden from view by the archway of the grand hallway. She was on the phone with one of her friends, likely someone from her inner circle who understood the intricate language of their shared world. "Brenda, you simply wouldn't believe it," Eleanor was saying, a dry laugh punctuating her words. "He's still so blind, utterly, completely blind." My breath caught in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that felt like ice water in my veins, that she was talking about Mark, about me. Every time I see them together, my heart just breaks for him. He had the world at his feet, with a girl like Amelia brilliant, from a good family, someone who could have built an empire with him. And he threw it all away for a girl who serves coffee. The way she said serves coffee was not a statement of fact. It was a verdict, a life sentence to insignificance. The sound of her sipping something, probably tea from a porcelain cup, echoed in the silent hall. "I try, Brenda. Lord knows I try," she continued, her voice dropping into a tone of feigned martyrdom. I buy her proper clothes. I try to introduce her to the right people. I give her books to read so she might absorb some semblance of ambition. But there's simply nothing there. It's like trying to polish a stone. You just end up with a shiny, worthless stone. Her friend must have said something on the other end, because Eleanor's voice hardened, the final shred of civility dissolving. Of course, I worry about an accident. The worst thing would be for her to trap him with a child. Can you imagine my grandchild being raised by someone with no culture, no understanding of our world? A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to press my hand against the cold wall to steady myself. The migraine was forgotten, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. And then came the final, fatal blow. The words that would echo in my mind for months. The words that would sever the last thread of my naive hope. Honestly, at this point, I just pray, she said, her voice a low, fervent whisper. I pray every single day that Mark will finally come to his senses, that he will wake up and see this catastrophic mistake for what it is, and find the strength to leave that little thing. It's the only hope I have left for him. That little thing, not Clara, not your son's wife, a thing, an object, a mistake to be erased. The prayer of a mother was not for her son's happiness, but for the destruction of his marriage, the demolition of my life. I stood there, motionless, long after I heard the gentle click of her hanging up the phone. The silence that descended upon the house was no longer peaceful, it was a vacuum. The sound of a world that had just ended. In that moment, something inside me broke, but it was not my spirit. It was the delusion I had clung to for 3 years, the delusion that if I tried hard enough, if I was patient enough, if I contorted myself into a shape she found acceptable, I could earn a place in this family. Her prayer was the answer to a question I had been too afraid to ask. Acceptance was never on the table. I was not a project to be improved. I was an obstacle to be removed. I turned and walked silently back to the front door, slipping my shoes on and leaving the house without a sound. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. The city lights blurring through a haze of something that wasn't tears, but a terrifying, crystalline focus. I was not fighting for my marriage anymore. Mark had made his choice. His silent surrenders, 1,000 tiny betrayals that now coalesced into one unbearable truth. I was not fighting to win Eleanor's approval. That was a rigged game I had finally found the wisdom to stop playing. From this moment on, I was fighting for myself. The goal was no longer to fit into their world, it was to build my own. The days that followed were lived in a stray, muted reality. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still went to work, I still smiled at Mark, I still endured Sunday dinners, but inside, a quiet revolution was taking place. I was no longer a participant in my own life. I was an observer, a strategist gathering intelligence for an escape I had not yet planned. The cafe, my beloved sanctuary, took on a new significance. It was no longer just a place of passion. It was my only sovereign territory. The only place where my skills were currency and my worth was undeniable. It was the foundation from which I would have to rebuild everything. I poured myself into my work with a new, fierce determination. My movements behind the counter becoming sharper, more focused. Every perfectly steamed latte, every satisfied customer was a small act of defiance, a quiet affirmation of the value Eleanor had tried so hard to deny. It was during this period of quiet awakening that the universe sent me a sign, not in a grand cinematic gesture, but in the form of a man who sat in the corner booth. Mr. Arthur Harrison was a fixture at the daily grind. He would arrive at 7 a.m. sharp every weekday, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, and order a double espresso. Black. He never read the paper, never looked at his phone. He just sat for precisely 15 minutes, observing the morning rush with a stern, impassive expression before leaving as silently as he had arrived. He was an intimidating presence, a man who seemed to exist on a different plane from the casual morning chatter of the cafe. My attempts at friendly small talk in his first few weeks had been met with a polite but firm nod that discouraged any further conversation. So, I learned to simply give him his espresso and leave him to his silent observations. One particularly chaotic Thursday morning, the door swung open with a force that made the little bell above it jingle in alarm. In strode a man who carried an aura of self importance like a shield. He was a well known local tech blogger, famous for his scathing online reviews and a sense of entitlement that preceded him. He ordered a ridiculously complex drink with 6 different modifiers. And when it arrived, he declared it unacceptable in a voice loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. He claimed the foam was a millimeter too thin, the temperature half a degree too cool. It was a clear power play, a performance for an audience of strangers. He pulled out his phone, announcing to his online followers that he was about to live stream the abysmal service at the Daily Grind. A nervous hush fell over the cafe. My younger coworker looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. In that moment, with the blogger's smug face lit by the glow of his phone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was my space, this was my craft, and I would not let him desecrate it. I walked over to his table. My movements calm and deliberate. I did not apologize or make excuses. I simply met his gaze and said, in a low, steady voice, "You are clearly a connoisseur of coffee, and I can see we have not met your standards today. Allow me to remake it for you personally. I would be grateful if you would guide me through your exact preferences." I disarmed him with respect. I validated his ridiculous complaint while simultaneously taking complete control of the situation. He was so taken aback by the lack of confrontation that he stammered and lowered his phone. I led him to the counter and treated the moment like a masterclass. I had him feel the texture of the beans. I explained the nuance of the grind. I let him watch as I pulled the perfect shot, the rich crema cascading into the cup. I steamed the milk while explaining the science of creating velvety foam. I turned his public complaint into a private, educational experience. By the end, I presented him with a coffee made to his absurdly specific standards. He was speechless. He took a sip, and his eyes widened in genuine surprise. It was perfect. He deleted his online post, left a $20 tip, and walked out without another word. The cafe slowly exhaled, the tense silence breaking into a quiet buzz of conversation. As I was wiping down the counter, a shadow fell over me. It was Mr. Harrison, his double espresso finished. On his way out, he stopped in front of me, and for the first time, his stern expression softened into something resembling professional admiration. "That," he said, his voice a low baritone, "was the finest display of guest recovery and brand management I have witnessed in a decade." I was so surprised I could only manage a small, "Thank you." He looked at me, his eyes sharp and intelligent, and it felt as though he was seeing right through the apron to the core of who I was. "Talent like that," he continued, placing a crisp, heavy business card on the counter, "is wasted in a place like this, no matter how good the coffee is." I looked down at the card. The elegant, embossed lettering read Arthur Harrison, General Manager, the Olympus Hotel, Portland. He met my eyes one last time. "Call me if you ever decide you want a real career." And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving the small, white card sitting on the counter like a key to a world I had never imagined existed. The small white business card sat in the drawer of my nightstand, hidden beneath a stack of scarves I no longer wore. For 3 days. It was my secret, a dangerous and exhilarating piece of contraband in the sterile territory of my life. During the day, I would perform the duties of my existence. I was a barista, a wife, a daughter-in-law. But at night, in the silent darkness of the bedroom, long after Mark's breathing had evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep, I would slip it from its hiding place. The heavy cardstock felt substantial in my hands. The embossed letters of the Olympus Hotel, a raised promise against my fingertips. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a door, slightly ajar, leading to a world I couldn't yet imagine. And with each passing day, the thought of turning the handle became less of a fantasy and more of a necessity. The decision was not born of courage, but of quiet desperation. It was solidified during another one of Eleanor's perfectly orchestrated Sunday dinners. She spoke at length about the son of a friend who had just sold his tech startup for a staggering sum. "It just goes to show you, Mark," she said, her eyes glittering as she looked at her son. "What can be achieved when you have a partner who is also your intellectual equal, someone who pushes you to be your best self?" The intended target of her words, as always, was me. But for the first time, the barb didn't pierce my heart. It glanced off a new, hard surface that was forming around it. As I sat there, pushing a piece of asparagus around my plate, I looked at her, and I didn't feel hurt. I felt a profound, bottomless pity. Her world was so small, her definition of worth so narrow and brittle. That night, I took the card from its drawer, my hand no longer trembling. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sent a short professional email to the address listed under Mr. Harrison's name. The lie came to my lips more easily than I expected. "I'm going to visit Sarah for a couple of days," I told Mark a week later, naming a college friend who had moved to California years ago. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was all I could muster. The truth felt too large and too dangerous to even whisper within the walls of that house. Mark's reaction, or lack thereof, was the final confirmation I needed. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Oh, okay, have fun," he said, his voice absent, his mind already back in the spreadsheets that consumed his evenings. He didn't ask which Sarah, or how she was doing, or why I was suddenly driving to see her. The man who once knew every detail of my friendships now viewed my life outside of him as a series of irrelevant subplots. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for the deception, but a much larger part of me felt an odd sense of liberation. My absence was of so little consequence to him that it granted me an invisible freedom. The drive south from Seattle to Portland on Interstate 5 was a journey through 100 shades of green and gray. Towering Douglas firs lined the highway, their dark branches heavy with the persistent drizzle of the Pacific Northwest. The sky was a thick, seamless blanket of gray clouds. It was a somber landscape, but I found a strange comfort in it. It matched the muted state of my own heart. For the first hour, my mind was a chaotic storm of self-doubt. What was I doing? I was a barista, not a hotel manager. I was about to walk into an interview for a career I knew nothing about. In a world where I didn't belong, Eleanor's voice was a venomous whisper in my head, listing all my inadequacies, reminding me that I was a shiny, worthless stone. I almost turned the car around 3 times, but as the miles rolled by, something began to shift. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers, the drone of the engine, the endless ribbon of wet asphalt ahead, it all created a hypnotic state, a space for my own thoughts to finally surface, clear and uninterrupted. I thought about the girl who had fallen in love with Mark, the girl who had been so full of hope. And I thought about the woman I had become, a person who apologized for her own existence, who measured her words and shrank her own presence to avoid causing a ripple in Eleanor's placid, cruel pond. The woman driving this car was not the woman who had said, "I do." The prayer I had overheard was not just a wish for my departure, it was a curse that had already worked. For the Clara that Mark had married was already gone. This drive, this interview, was not about becoming someone new. It was about finding my way back to the person I had lost. By the time the skyline of Portland emerged through the mist, the fear had not vanished, but it was now sitting beside a new, steely resolve. The Olympus Hotel did not look like a place where I belonged. It rose from the heart of downtown Portland, not with the cold, corporate grandeur of a chain hotel, but with the quiet, stately elegance of a historic institution. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble, dark mahogany, and muted gold accents. A colossal floral arrangement sat in the center of the room. It sent a subtle, expensive perfume. The air was filled with a hushed, purposeful energy. Men and women in impeccably tailored suits spoke in low tones, their movements efficient and graceful. It was Eleanor's world, refined and perfected. My hands felt clammy as I gave my name to the concierge, my simple black blazer and slacks feeling wholly inadequate. I was led not to a sterile HR office, but to a quiet, book-lined study on a higher floor overlooking the city. Mr. Harrison was standing by the window when I entered. He turned, and his stern face broke into a small, professional smile. He was different here. In his element, he exuded an aura of calm, absolute control. The interview was unlike any I'd ever experienced. There were no questions about my 5-year plan or my greatest weakness. It was a conversation, a series of challenges and scenarios posed with thoughtful precision. He wanted to know not what I had done, but how I thought. A high-profile guest, a famous actress, checks out, he began, his hands steepled on the large oak desk. An hour later, she calls in a panic. A family heirloom, a vintage sapphire necklace, is missing from her suite. She is hysterical and is accusing our housekeeping staff of theft. The press will get wind of this within the hour. What do? My mind immediately flew back to the cafe. I thought of a time when a customer had accused us of overcharging her voice rising with righteous indignation. I remembered the importance of de-escalation, of making the person feel heard before you address the problem. My first call is not to security, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My first call is to the guest herself. I would listen to her. Let her vent her fear and anger without interruption. I would assure her that the entire hotel is now dedicated to a single purpose: finding her necklace. I would treat her not as an accuser, but as a partner in the search. I went on, explaining how I would personally oversee a methodical search of the room, how I would review security footage with discretion, how I would keep the guest informed us every 30 minutes, so she never felt forgotten. I explained that my goal was to make her feel that the hotel was on her side, even if she was accusing it. Mr. Harrison listened, his gaze intense, nodding slowly. The scenarios grew more complex. He presented me with diplomatic nightmares and logistical impossibilities. With each question, I found myself drawing not on business theory from Eleanor's books, but on the years of lived experience at the daily grind. The angry celebrity was the tech blogger. The feuding VIPs were the two regular customers who couldn't stand each other and always wanted the same table. A sudden power outage during a wedding reception was the terror of the espresso machine breaking during the morning rush. My solutions were not corporate, they were human. They were built on empathy, observation, and the simple, profound understanding that everyone, no matter how wealthy or powerful, wants to feel seen and respected. For an hour. I was not a barista, I was a strategist, a diplomat, a crisis manager. When it was over, I stood to leave, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. Thank you for your time, Mr. Harrison. He rose as well and walked me to the door. No, Ms. Walsh, he said, and the formal use of my name sent a small jolt through me. Thank you for yours. You have given me a great deal to think about. As I walked out of the quiet study, back into the hushed elegance of the hotel, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years began to bubble up inside me. It was a bright, warm sensation that spread through my chest and into my limbs. It was confidence, in that room. I had not been judged by my apron or my background. I had been judged by my mind, my instincts, and my character. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had been enough. The drive back to Seattle felt different. The gray sky no longer seemed somber. It seemed soft and peaceful. I was driving back to my cage, but now I knew the door was unlocked. I just had to decide when to open it. The week that followed was an exercise in surreal patience. I was living a double life, my body going through the motions in Seattle while my mind and my hope resided in Portland. I would stare at my phone, my heart leaping at every email notification, only to have it sink when it was just a promotional ad or a message from the bank. During this agonizing period of limbo, the universe decided to grant me one final test, one more Sunday dinner at Eleanor's. But this time, something was different. Her words, her condescending tone, her casual mention of Amelia's latest triumph, none of it landed. It was like watching a performance from behind a thick pane of glass. The insults were muted, the psychological jabs rendered harmless. I was no longer their target because my sense of self was no longer located in their dining room. It was waiting for me in an email inbox, in a city 170 miles away. My calm detachment seemed to unnerve Eleanor more than any argument ever had. The email arrived on a Friday morning, while I was on my break at the cafe, sitting in the small back office. The subject line was simple, professional, and it made my entire world stop. Offer of employment, the Olympus Hotel. My hands trembled so violently I could barely click the mouse. I opened the PDF, my eyes scanning the elegant letterhead, the formal language, and then the numbers. The position was Guest Experience Coordinator, a title that felt both grand and fitting. The salary was nearly double what I made in a year of frantic, tip-dependent work. The offer included full health and dental benefits, a retirement plan, and a final line that made me gasp. A relocation stipend and 1 month of complimentary housing in our executive suites will be provided to facilitate your transition to Portland. It wasn't just a job offer, it was an escape plan, fully funded and meticulously detailed. It was a new life, handed to me on a silver platter. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring and sharpening, the reality of it slowly sinking in. This was real. This was happening. My first impulse was to run out of the office, to call Mark, to shout the news, to finally have a piece of armor so bright and shining that even Eleanor's darkness couldn't touch it. But I stopped myself. The victory was too new, too fragile. It was mine, born of my own secret efforts. Sharing it now felt like exposing it to the elements before it had a chance to take root. And then, a new plan began to form, a quiet and patient strategy. My birthday was in 2 weeks, for years. It had been an occasion marked by Eleanor's performative generosity and my own quiet disappointment. This year, it would be different. I would accept the job, I would sign the contract, I would plan my departure in secret. And on my birthday, I would present this new life to Mark, not as an ultimatum, but as a gift. It would be my proof that we could escape, that we could build a future on my terms, on the foundation of my success, far away from his mother's corrosive influence. It was, I realized, a deeply naive hope, a final, lingering belief in the man I had married, not the man he had become. I still wanted to save us. I wanted to show him the unlocked door and ask him to walk through it with me. And so I lived with my secret. It became my shield and my comfort during the day. I would smile and pour coffee. I would go home and play the part of the dutiful wife. But inside, I was counting down the days, holding on to the knowledge that I was no longer a resident of their world, but merely a visitor with a departure date circled in bright, triumphant red on my calendar. The 2 weeks that followed the arrival of that life-altering email were the strangest of my life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a secret agent in my own home. On the outside, I was the same Clara, performing the familiar choreography of my days, the morning rush at the cafe, the quiet evenings with Mark, the tense Sunday dinners at Eleanor's. But on the inside, I was a different person entirely. I was the architect of a secret future. A woman meticulously planning her own liberation while smiling politely and passing the salt. The signed contract from the Olympus Hotel was saved on a password-protected file on my laptop. A digital key to a life that felt more real to me than the physical world I inhabited. The secret was a constant, warm hum beneath the surface of my skin, a shield that rendered Eleanor's daily corrosions utterly powerless. I began to see my life with a new, almost clinical detachment. Eleanor's pointed remarks about my lack of progress were no longer personal attacks, they were simply data points. Further evidence for a conclusion I had already reached. Mark's growing distance, his vacant eyes as I tried to talk to him about my day, was no longer a source of fresh pain. It was a sad, quiet confirmation that the man I had married was already a ghost. I found myself studying them, not with anger, but with a kind of anthropological curiosity. I watched the intricate dance of dysfunction, the way Mark's opinions would subtly shift to mirror his mother's after a private conversation, the way Eleanor would reward his compliance with a rare smile of approval. They were trapped in a system of their own making, and for the first time, I realized I was the only one who had the power to simply walk away. My hope, however, had not yet been fully extinguished. It had simply changed shape. It was no longer a passive wish for acceptance, but an active plan for a shared escape. The job offer was not just my lifeline. I foolishly believed it could be his. Two, my plan was to present it to him on my birthday, not as an ultimatum, but as a gift of our own. It was a tangible vision of a new beginning, a life in a new city where we could be a team again, far from the gravitational pull of his mother's influence. It was, I see now, the last, desperate act of a dying love, an attempt to resuscitate the man who had proposed to me in a cafe, the man who had once been proud of the woman who was fighting to reemerge. This naive hope was the reason I didn't see the ambush coming. The announcement came on a Sunday, a week before my 38th birthday. "Clara, dear," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with an uncharacteristically festive warmth that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Since it's such a milestone birthday, I've decided we must celebrate it properly. I've taken the liberty of booking a private room at Aurelia for next Thursday evening." A silence fell over the dining table. Aurelia was one of Seattle's most exclusive and ostentatious restaurants, a place where a single entree cost more than I made in a day. It was Eleanor's temple, a place she went to see and be seen. For her to suggest celebrating me there was so far out of character, it felt like a glitch in the Matrix. "Mom, that's a fantastic idea," Mark said, his voice brimming with a strange, manufactured enthusiasm. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his palm clammy. His sister, Lydia, who had also joined us for dinner, chimed in, her smile a little too wide. "It's going to be perfect. Clara, you deserve it." Their coordinated excitement was unnerving. For years, my birthday had been an afterthought, marked by a store-bought cake and a gift certificate chosen by Eleanor's assistant. This sudden, lavish attention felt less like a kindness and more like a carefully set stage. But my foolish, hopeful heart chose to interpret it differently. It was a peace offering. It was a sign that they were finally trying. My secret plan to present Mark with my own good news felt even more perfect now. It would be my contribution to this new chapter of family harmony. The days leading up to the dinner were filled with a feverish, anticipatory energy. Mark and Lydia were constantly texting, exchanging knowing glances over my head. They'd stop talking abruptly when I entered a room, their faces alight with the conspiratorial glee of people planning a surprise. I mistook their secrecy for thoughtfulness, their strange behavior for the jitters of orchestrating a perfect evening. I spent an entire afternoon choosing what to wear, not to please Eleanor, but to honor the woman I was about to become. I chose a simple, elegant navy dress, a garment that felt like my own skin, professional yet understated. It was the armor of a woman who knew her own worth, a quiet statement of the independence I held coiled and ready within me. I was dressing for my future, not for their approval. The evening of my birthday arrived, and the sense of performance was palpable from the moment Mark and I stepped out of the car. He held my hand too tightly, his smile fixed and rigid. The restaurant was even more breathtaking and intimidating than I had imagined. A world of hushed whispers, gleaming crystal, and silent, efficient waiters. Eleanor and Lydia were already waiting in a secluded private room, a space surrounded by glass walls that looked out onto a glittering city skyline. They both stood to greet me, their smiles bright and predatory. The conversation throughout dinner was a masterpiece of artificiality. They asked me about my plans for the future, with a new and intense interest. I spoke vaguely about wanting to pursue new challenges, about feeling ready for a change, and they nodded enthusiastically, misinterpreting my words as a surrender to their long-held desires for my transformation. They thought I was finally ready to enroll in a business program, to become a woman they could proudly display. They had no idea my transformation was already complete, my new life already waiting for me. The meal concluded, and the charade reached its crescendo. A waiter brought in a small, elegant cake, a single, flickering candle in its center. The four of them sang Happy Birthday in a strained, slightly off-key harmony that echoed unnervingly in the quiet room. "Make a wish, honey," Mark urged, and I saw that his phone was already in his hand, propped up against a water glass, the small red light of the record button glowing in the dim light. Lydia's phone was out too, held at a slightly different angle. A cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. This was more than just capturing a memory. This was coordinated. This was documentation. I closed my eyes, and the wish I made was a silent, desperate plea. Please let this be what I think it is. Let this be the start of us again. I blew out the candle, and their applause felt sharp and brittle. And then came the main event. Eleanor reached for a large, exquisitely wrapped gift box that had been sitting on the chair beside her. The paper was a heavy, cream-colored silk, the ribbon a cascade of gold. It was a box fit for crown jewels. "And now, for your gift," she announced, her voice carrying a theatrical weight. She slid the box across the polished table toward me. "This is from all of us. Clara, a special gift for a special occasion. We felt this transition in your life deserved something truly significant." Her eyes were shining with a triumphant, feverish light that I finally recognized not as joy, but as bloodlust. My hands felt clumsy and numb as I fumbled with the golden ribbon. The room was silent. Save for the faint clinking of silverware from the main dining room, all three of them leaned forward, their faces a mixture of eager anticipation, their phones silently recording every flicker of my expression. I lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was not jewelry, not a designer scarf, not any of the things I might have expected. It was a thick, professionally bound document. My heart, which had been pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety, suddenly went still. The top page was a cover sheet, and the words printed on it in bold. Imposing letters seemed to leap off the page and burn themselves into my brain. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Time seemed to slow, the ambient sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull, distant roar. My eyes scanned the page, taking in the cold, legal language. Clara Walsh, petitioner, versus Mark Walsh, respondent. And there, at the bottom of the final page, was his signature. Mark's familiar, looping signature, scrawled with a confidence that shattered the last remnants of my naive heart. It was dated a week prior. This entire performance, the lavish dinner, the fake smiles, the birthday song, had all been a lie. A cruel and elaborate stage play designed for this single moment of annihilation. I looked up from the document, my gaze slowly moving from Mark's ashen, guilty face to Lydia's gleeful smirk, and finally, to Eleanor. Her smile was one of pure, unadulterated victory. She had won. She had finally and completely excised the worthless stone from her perfect family. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring her triumph. Then, she leaned forward, her voice low and clear. A final, perfectly delivered line for the cameras that were still rolling. "This is our gift to you, Clara," she said, her expression one of mock sympathy. "We've all discussed it, and we agree. It's time for a fresh start. For everyone. You are simply not a good fit for this family. The final words of her declaration hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. You are simply not a good fit for this family. For a long, suspended moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The distant clinking of forks on plates, the murmur of conversations from the main dining room, the very hum of the city outside our glass-walled prison. It all faded into an immense, profound silence. There were 4 people in that room, but in that moment, 3 of them ceased to exist for me. They became figures in a tableau, their expressions frozen in triumphant expectation. Eleanor's serene, Victoria's smile, Lydia's cheap, gleeful smirk, and Mark's pathetic, hollowed-out mask of a man who had just abdicated his own soul. The 2 small. Red lights from their phones were like demonic, unblinking eyes, waiting hungrily to feast on my destruction. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for the pleading, the hysteria, the predictable and satisfying collapse of the woman they had spent 3 years systematically dismantling. But the collapse never came. Instead, something else happened inside me, something I could never have anticipated. The searing pain I expected, the tidal wave of grief and humiliation, it never arrived. In its place, a strange and wonderful clarity began to spread through me, as cool and cleansing as a winter morning. It was the most profound moment of stillness I had ever known. The years of confusion, the constant, gnawing anxiety, the desperate, exhausting effort of trying to be someone else, it all simply evaporated. The complex, tangled knot of my life, which I had spent years trying to unravel, had not been untied. It had been severed with a single, brutal stroke. And in its place was a beautiful, terrifying, and utterly simple truth. I was free. My gaze drifted over the faces of my captors, but I no longer saw them as family. I saw them for what they were, with the unflinching perception of a stranger. I looked at Lydia, and I saw not a sister-in-law, but a small, petty creature whose own life was so devoid of substance that she could only feel pleasure through the pain of others. Her glee was the empty joy of a spectator, not the victory of a participant. Then, my eyes moved to Eleanor, the powerful, intimidating matriarch who had haunted my every waking thought, was gone. In her place sat a deeply insecure and frightened woman, so terrified of her own perceived inadequacies that she had to construct an elaborate fortress of wealth and social standing around herself. Her only source of power was not in building things up, but in tearing them down. Her cruelty was not a sign of her strength, but of her profound weakness. She was a queen ruling over a kingdom of ghosts and polished silver. And I pitied her. Finally, I looked at my husband, at Mark, and the last. Stubborn embers of love in my heart went cold. Turning to ash, I saw him. For the first time, I truly saw the man sitting across from me. There was no strength, no conflict, no tortured soul torn between love and duty. There was only a void. He was a hollow man, a boy who had never summoned the courage to leave his mother's shadow. And so he had invited me into it instead, hoping my warmth could make a home for him there. His signature on that document was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of surrender. He had surrendered his vows, his partnership, his own agency, for the comfort of his mother's approval. The man I had fallen in love with, the man who had proposed to me in the cafe, had not been murdered by his mother. He had simply faded away from the lack of courage, like a photograph left out in the sun. And I knew, with a certainty that was as peaceful as it was absolute, that I was not losing a husband. I was losing a ghost. A black fountain pen lay beside the legal documents, placed there with the same theatrical foresight as the gift box itself. Eleanor nudged it slightly with her manicured finger, a silent command. My movements felt fluid and deliberate, no longer clumsy or numb. I reached for the pen, my hand perfectly steady. The weight of it was cool and solid in my grasp. I uncapped it, the small click echoing in the silent room. I thought of the last time I'd signed my name next to Mark's, on our marriage license, my hand trembling with hope and joy. This time, there was no trembling. There was only resolve. I bent over the document, the sharp, clean scent of expensive ink filling my senses, and I signed my name, Clara Walsh, on the designated line. The ink flowed from the nib in a smooth, dark, and decisive stroke. It was not a signature of defeat. It was a signature of emancipation. I calmly placed the cap back on the pen, the click of it sealing the end of a chapter. I folded the document with care, slid it back into its beautiful box, and closed the lid. Then, I pushed it gently back across the polished surface of the table, toward Eleanor. Her victorious smile had faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction she had scripted. I leaned forward slightly, and when I spoke, my voice was not a whisper nor a shout. It was calm, measured, and completely devoid of the emotion they had been so eager to record. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, looking directly into her bewildered eyes. "This is, without a doubt, the most honest and valuable gift you have ever given me." The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. My words, spoken with such chilling sincerity, had shattered their script. Eleanor's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Lydia's gleeful expression dissolved into a mask of stunned disbelief. Her phone wavered in her hand. Mark flinched as if I had struck him. They had come prepared for a storm, for tears and rage, and they had no idea what to do with this serene, unassailable calm. The power dynamic, which had been so firmly in their favor, was suddenly, inexplicably, tilting. I did not give them time to recover. I placed my hands on the table, took a deep breath, and stood up. The simple act of rising to my feet felt monumental. I was no longer the subject of their judgment. Seated and receiving their verdict, I was on my feet, looking down on them, in every sense of the word. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, my own armor that I had chosen for myself, and I looked at the three of them, these architects of my pain who now seemed so small and confused. "Since we're all sharing major life changes tonight," I began, my voice carrying a new resonance in the quiet room, "I suppose it's my turn." I let the statement hang in the air, allowing the full weight of their attention to gather. Eleanor's confusion was now tinged with a visible apprehension. "I have some news of my own," I continued, my gaze sweeping over their shocked faces before finally landing on Mark. 3 weeks ago, I was offered a position at the Olympus Hotel in Portland. It's a management track role, as a guest experience coordinator. I accepted the offer last week. The wave of shock that rolled through them was a physical thing, a palpable ripple in the air. Eleanor's face went pale, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into dust. Lydia's phone dipped, and for a second, I could see her own stunned face reflected on the black screen. They were seeing not a victim, but a strategist, a woman whose own plans had been moving silently beneath the surface of their clumsy, cruel plot. "The salary is considerable," I added, the details now serving as small, sharp daggers of truth. "They are providing full benefits, a retirement plan, and a generous relocation package to help me get settled." I paused, letting the implications of that sink in. I was not just employed, I was valued. I was not just leaving, I was being actively recruited and invested in. The narrative she had so carefully crafted for 3 years of me as a lost, ambitionless creature was being publicly dismantled by my own quiet success. Then, I turned my full attention to my husband, the hollow man with the recording phone. I looked directly at him, ensuring he understood that these final words were for him alone. "I start in 2 weeks," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. I was worried about the logistics of the move, about how to handle leaving all of this behind. I gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the life they had built, at the marriage he had just discarded. But your gift, I said, my eyes meeting his, has made all of that beautifully, wonderfully simple. You've taken care of the one loose end I wasn't sure how to tie. His face crumpled, the last shred of his composure gone. The camera in his hand captured his own devastation, a permanent record of the moment he realized he had not discarded a burden, but a woman who was already on her way to a life far beyond his reach. He had not freed himself. He had merely made my own escape cleaner. Without another word, I turned my back on them. I walked out of the private dining room, my steps even and unhurried. As I passed through the main restaurant, I felt the eyes of other diners on me, their conversations having paused as they sensed the seismic shift in our private drama. I didn't look at them, but I could feel their silent judgment. And for the first time, it was not directed at me. It was aimed at the three stunned figures I had left behind, frozen in the wreckage of their own failed ambush. I pushed open the heavy doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool, damp night air. It was the first breath of the rest of my life, and it had never tasted so sweet. The first breath of cool, damp night air I took outside that restaurant was the beginning of my new life. The weeks that followed were a blur of focused, purposeful action. I moved through the process of disentangling my life from the Walsh family with the detached efficiency of a project manager. I packed my belongings from the cold, silent house while Mark was at work, leaving behind every gift Eleanor had ever given me, every object that was a monument to their judgment. The divorce was swift and surgically clean, their own meticulously recorded videos, intended to be trophies of my humiliation, became irrefutable evidence of emotional cruelty in the eyes of the law. My lawyer called it the most straightforward case he had ever seen. I asked for nothing but my freedom, and it was granted without contest. I left Seattle on a crisp autumn morning, my entire life packed into my small car, the city skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a memory. 18 months later, I am a different woman living in a different world. My name is Clara Walsh again, a name I reclaimed with the same quiet determination that has defined my new existence. I live in a corner apartment on the 27th floor of a building in downtown Portland, a place I chose and paid for myself. Its main feature is a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the city and the Willamette River. I watch the bridges stitch the two halves of the city together, their lights glittering like fallen constellations in the twilight. This view is the first thing I see in the morning and the last thing I see at night. It is a constant, beautiful reminder that the world is wide and full of possibilities. A stark contrast to the suffocatingly narrow view I had from within the walls of Eleanor's world. My home is filled with books I want to read, plants I nurture, and a deep, comfortable silence that is peaceful, not oppressive. It is a sanctuary I built, not a cage I was placed in. My professional life has blossomed in ways my former self would not have dared to dream. I am the head of guest experience at the Olympus Hotel, a title that feels less like a job and more like a calling. My office, just adjacent to Mr. Harrison's, also overlooks the city. He has been more than a boss. He has been a mentor, a man who saw a set of skills in me that I had been taught to believe were worthless. You can teach someone how to manage a budget, Clara, he told me during a review, but you can't teach them how to read a room. You can't teach them how to make a person feel seen. That is your gift. Under his guidance, I have thrived. I now lead a team of 20 coordinators, and I see the same flicker of potential in some of them that he saw in me. I make it my mission to nurture it, to ensure that talent is recognized, not dismissed. The ghosts of my past life try to reach me. Of course, Mark's text messages still arrive. Intermittent signals from a distant, shipwrecked world. They began as angry, confused demands for an explanation. Then they softened into pleading apologies, filled with hollow promises. Lately, they have become mournful and nostalgic. Messages sent late at night with pictures of us from the early, happy days, accompanied by a single, pathetic question. Do you remember this? I read them, not with anger or sadness, but with the detached pity one feels for a stranger who has made a terrible, life-altering mistake. I never reply. I don't block his number. I simply let the messages accumulate. A digital graveyard of a life I no longer lead. A silent testament to the fact that his regret is his burden to carry, not mine to absolve. My silence is the only answer he will ever need. Tonight is the annual Founders Gala, the most important social event on the Olympus Hotel's calendar. The grand ballroom has been transformed into an enchanted forest, with twinkling lights woven into towering birch branches and tables draped in moss green velvet. It is a night of immense pressure, a symphony of moving parts that I am responsible for conducting, and I have never felt more alive. I move through the room, a ghost in a simple black dress, an earpiece my only accessory. My team a well-oiled machine responding to my quiet commands. My job is to ensure that for our 500 distinguished guests, the evening is flawless, a seamless fantasy from the moment they arrive to the moment they depart. An hour into the event, a small vibration comes from the radio on my hip. It's from Sarah, one of my most promising junior coordinators, her voice tight with stress. Clara, we have a situation at table 19. A guest is very unhappy with the placement. She's demanding to speak with the highest level manager available. I feel a calm settle over me. This is my world. These are the fires I was born to put out. I'm on my way. Sarah, keep the guest comfortable, I say into my wrist microphone, my voice even and reassuring. I navigate the crowded ballroom, my path a study in efficient grace, my eyes already scanning the floor plan on my tablet, identifying the table and the guest's name. And then I see it. Table 19, guest of honor, Eleanor Walsh. For a single, fleeting second, the world tilts on its axis. It is a ghost stepping out of a memory and into my reality. I pause behind a large floral arrangement, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum, not of panic, but of quiet, profound anticipation. The final scene of a play I never knew I was writing was about to begin. I take one deep, cleansing breath, smooth the front of my dress, and step out into the light. I can see her before she sees me. She is exactly as I remember, a perfectly preserved specimen of wealth and discontent. She is berating poor Sarah, her voice a low, venomous hiss, her expression one of utter disdain. She is complaining that her table, while prominent, is not the center table. A profound and unacceptable slight, given her status as a primary benefactor. It is a tantrum of ego, a performance of privilege, and it is so perfectly. Predictably, Eleanor, I approach the table, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Sarah, I say, my voice calm and clear. The young coordinator looks up at me, her eyes wide with relief. Thank you, I can handle it from here. Then I turn my attention to the guest. Eleanor is still looking at Sarah, her rant not yet finished. I am not speaking to an assistant, she snaps. I demand to see the person in charge. Good evening, I say, and the sound of my voice finally makes her turn her head. I'm Clara Walsh, the head of guest experience. I understand there is an issue with your table this evening. The moment her eyes meet mine is everything. It is a cinematic slow-motion collapse. A complete system failure in her perfectly ordered world. The color drains from her face, leaving behind a pallid, chalky mask of disbelief. Her mouth, which had been twisted in a sneer of complaint, falls slightly open. The imperious anger in her eyes is extinguished. replaced by a dawning, horrified recognition. The woman she had dismissed, the worthless stone she had tried to discard, the little thing whose life she had prayed for the destruction of, is now standing before her, poised, professional, and in a position of absolute authority over her current predicament. My name badge, gleaming under the soft light of the chandelier. Is impossible to miss Clara Walsh, head of guest experience. The use of my maiden name is the final, silent confirmation. I am no longer one of hers. I am myself. I do not smile. I do not gloat. My revenge is not in cruelty, but in competence. I simply hold her gaze. My expression one of polite, professional neutrality. And I wait. I let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of the situation to settle upon her. I let her see the woman I have become, a woman who is not only surviving, but thriving. In the very world of luxury and influence she holds so dear, I let her understand that she's no longer the queen passing judgment. She is just another customer. And I am the manager. After a long, breathless moment, she seems to shrink into her chair, the fight completely gone from her. She can only manage a small to choked sound. I take that as my cue. I glance at my tablet as if consulting it for the first time. Ah, I see the issue, I say, my tone efficient and helpful. There was a last-minute adjustment for the keynote speakers party. However, it appears we've just had a cancellation at a more favorable location. If you'll allow me a moment, I will have my team escort you and your guests to Table 7. Table 7, of course, was being held in reserve, a prime spot I could deploy at my discretion. I solve her problem with effortless grace, not because she is Eleanor, but because that is my job. I signal to Sarah, who is watching from a distance, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion. I give her a subtle nod, and she immediately understands, moving to coordinate the new seating arrangement. I have done it. The final knot is untied. I turn my attention back to Eleanor one last time. She looks smaller now, diminished, a woman utterly stripped of her power, lost in a narrative she can no longer control. I give her a small, impeccably polite smile. Is there anything else I can assist you with this evening, madam? The word madam hangs in the air between us, a term of professional deference that establishes an unbridgeable gulf. It is the final, perfect punctuation mark on our story. Without waiting for an answer, I give a slight nod, turn, and walk away. I do not look back. I continue my rounds, my earpiece murmuring with the small, manageable crises of the evening. I oversee the champagne toast. I coordinate with the orchestra conductor. I ensure every one of my 500 guests feels seen and valued. Later in the evening, I stand on a balcony overlooking the grand ballroom. The gala is a resounding success. The sound of laughter, music, and conversation rises up to meet me, a symphony of an evening I have orchestrated. The woman in the reflection of the glass is calm, confident, and serene. She is the architect of her own life, the queen of her own, much larger world, And as I look out over the glittering scene, I feel no anger, no bitterness, no lingering pain. I feel only a deep, profound, and peaceful sense of gratitude for the woman who handed me a box full of legal papers on my birthday, for the woman who, in her desperate attempt to destroy me, had accidentally, beautifully set me free.